event today. My name is Claudia Schwarz. I'm based in Berlin, Germany, and it's my great pleasure to invite Cliff Fluet to the stage and be able to interview him for today. Cliff, welcome. Thank you for your time, and I'm very excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about the implementations of AI in the creative industries. So if you don't mind kicking this conversation off with a short introduction of yourself, that'd be amazing.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you for the team for the invitation. My name's Cliff. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've worked at the cutting edge, I would say, of digital media and entertainment for the last 25 years. After qualifying as a lawyer, I went into the music industry, spent 5 years there, spent 5 years in broadcast, and for the last 15, 16 years, I've been a partner at a law firm called Lewis Silkin, mainly focused on digital media and new model technologies. A significant amount of my time, particularly since 2012, has been in the world of what I would call AI, dynamic content, immersive content. There are various names for it at the moment right now. I had the privilege of working with a number of major corporations on their implementation of these technologies, and also with a bunch of really exciting startups in the space who have then mostly ended up being bought by some massive conglomerates. So that's my background, and thank you again for the introduction.
So let's just dive right into it, I guess. So how much of your day-to-day is currently sort of related to AI, machine learning, and all of those little sister and brother technologies that surround artificial intelligence?
It's an interesting question. I would have said that if I'd answered that question about 5 years ago, I've said for about a third of my time. Now, the way I'd probably describe it is I'm working with platforms and technologies that touch some kind of algorithmic artificial intelligence. Of course, that's a phrase that can be used to capture all sorts of things: machine learning, machine information retrieval, robotic process automation, all the way to sort of full sentience, as it were. And I would say that the majority now of companies and issues I'm dealing with in some way touch AI. It's like, I don't know, 20 years ago, one might have called oneself a digital expert, and then digital's everything. And I suspect that there's going to be some kind of algorithmic based element to everything we do in the next few years. You can see it in relation to news, you can see it in relation to socials, we can see it in relation to other forms of content, shopping, of course. Platforms like Amazon have been, to a certain extent, AI powered for a very, very long time. But now we're really seeing it at the heart of entertainment, and that's a lot of what I'm involved in.
And what are sort of the top, let's say, 3 questions that clients are mostly concerned about when they approach you? You know, mostly clients who might be concerned with copyright issues, for example. So what are maybe the top 3 most asked questions or concerns?
Yeah, so in the content space, I'd say that the majority of the questions are about intellectual property, as you said, the application of what was very much a static format. That could be a piece of music, or that could be a piece of film, or that can be a piece of artwork, and that becoming dynamic. There's a huge question mark as to how do you possibly go around clearing these rights. And when one explains that the fundamentals of such usage is not altogether different than if one's to feature a piece of, I don't know, a piece of artwork in a movie. You know, you have to go through clearance processes, but what is probably more challenging is getting people to understand what they can do with the outputs, what they can do with the learning, and how they can apply that to that new dynamic piece of content. So I'd say that's way up there. Understanding data, understanding what can be done with that data and how it can be dealt with. And I'd say probably the last thing is about how to charge for it. Hate to be so mercantile and mercenary, but what is the value of something that can become now dynamic is one of the questions that we're finding. It plays itself out in negotiations, but actually it's much more a commercial question.
And do you find that there is sort of a large gap between the expectations of a client who's trying to build these business models and then the client on the other side who's basically, you know, in charge of licensing out copyright, for example, or intellectual property? Is there sort of a big gap in understanding sort of where people are, or is that not part, or has that sort of subsided in the past couple of years?
No. I think it's probably a different question. So In the early days of the internet, there seemed to be this view that it lived in this kind of intellectual property distortion zone. So it was the view you could put anything online or you could post anything anywhere without any consequence. So people don't necessarily have that kind of naivety in a kind of AI music, AI content, AI movie perspective. But there's broader questions with everything from definitions to, as I said, how you charge for it that tend to be much more the questions. So I think that the conversation has moved on in the right way in a world where AI is probably a little less, whilst it's less feared, it's probably no more understood. And that's where I think the debate really should be.
Mm.
What's the opportunities for AI as a tool? Where are the use cases? Where can it be useful? Whereas I would have said about 5 years ago, the debate was whose job is it going to take?
Yeah, do you find in platform like Entertain AI, which we're part of today, is that helping sort of to accelerate that process of understanding and sort of mutual, kind of joining sort of the same area of discussion?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that the more informed debate that there can be, the better. I think that where platforms and discussion areas and conferences like this can really help is really provide a narrative for people to be able to understand these things. When I first entered the industry 25 years ago, people were talking about cyber. Then there were people talking about the internet and they were talking about World Wide Web. And but many of the same mistakes and the same how should we say plays are going on right now in things like NFTs, right? You're seeing the same kind of hype curve, the same misunderstanding of rights, the same misunderstanding of where the value is. So humans don't change, technology changes absolutely, and where I think that the debate should be is about narratives. How do you make this useful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so looking at the past, 2.5 years, 3 years, especially during the pandemic, we've seen some really interesting changes in consumer behavior. Some, were quite threatening to the industry, but some were really interesting from a innovative, innovation kind of standpoint. So, do you see any specific sort of implementations that have kind of come out of this shift in consumer behavior, potentially sort of a change with from one platform to another, or some other elements of sort of new approaches to consuming creative content?
Yeah, so I think that the now that we are, let's 2 years into the pandemic, I won't say it's over quite yet, like some people seem to believe, but now we're 2 years on, the narrative has changed somewhat. So in the first few months, that sort of March, April, May 2020, we didn't know what was going on, and the way that people consumed content just changed completely. So you couldn't go to the movie theater. So platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus, which launched about that time, did extraordinarily well. And then other forms of content which people consumed when commuting. So something like radio and podcasts immediately
Mm-hmm.
saw quite a significant downturn. Now we definitely see a real leveling off. And one of the things that has accelerated the adoption of AI technologies has been the pandemic. Because as content owners are competing for that kind of advertising dollar or that subscription dollar, as it were, the importance of efficiency is absolutely vital. Now, if you work at Google or you work at Amazon, this occurred to you 20 years ago. Using AI technologies in order to be able to inform basket choices, ad choices, searching choices. But we're now definitely seeing it in the world of content. And we're seeing, sort of a number of immersive technologies take off purely through being in lockdown. One of the most famous examples and a huge hit during the pandemic was the Star Wars series, The Mandalorian, and a lot of it was to do with lockdown, about the use of volumetric capture. And now
Mm-hmm.
what has gone from being a kind of lockdown necessity is now becoming a major mainstream use to the creation and generation of content. How's that AI? Well, these extraordinary engines built in their case on Unreal, it requires an amount of learning of environments that only AI can give. So this confluence of these new platforms, these new engines, these no-code engines, informed by deep, wonderful, extraordinary AI, is frankly what is the reason why we can see Luke Skywalker again. And all of that was based upon AI deep learning in relation to the deepfake technology that brought him back, to technology platforms like Respeecher, which is an AI audio platform, essentially deepfake voice, in order to be able to transform the viewer experience. These tools, these technologies, they wouldn't have been thought of. They are not new technologies in and of themselves, but now that they are being applied now in so many areas, and we're seeing more and more businesses in Hollywood being bought up by video game companies or technology platforms. Look at the businesses that Unity are buying, look at the businesses that Adobe are buying, look at the businesses that Spotify are buying. These tend to be technology businesses based around AI voice, AI imagery, AI rendering, that are creating a whole new palette for the creative industries. That's only one, but we've got this massive uptake now, these hungry pipes and platforms that want these shows and want these content, and only AI can keep up with the pace of demand from consumers.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. So you've been talking about acquisitions and sort of integration of business models into larger corporations or media platforms or media owners. Do you feel like the investors or the larger corporations who are buying or acquiring these sort of startup-like companies, do you feel like they're making informed decisions, or is it sort of this usual craziness of let's just buy anything that kind of has AI in the title or in their pitch deck? Or is there sort of an informed choice? Are there some really, I mean, are the investments smart? Are they going in the right direction? Or what's your feeling on that?
Difficult to speak to that generally. I think that what there probably is now is a better understanding that there isn't some magic AI bullet that is going to solve a business's wants and needs. So they may buy something for ad insertion, they may have something for visuals, they may have something for voice, they may have something in relation to serving the right content to the right person when they have that platform. I'm working with businesses that can create content at speeds to fill very hungry pipes like TikTok. We're seeing in music services the need now to have motion video in order to be able to capture the element. So I think we're now starting to see a much more nuanced view. Buying one AI company will no more solve your problems than buying one production company.
Yeah, but is that, I mean, that is I understand that's sort of the rationale behind sort of those types of acquisitions, but is that something that is actually true for the investments that are being made? Or is it sort of let's buy in bulk and see what takes?
I would say that in the AI world, it's probably more nuanced. That buy in bulk, I'm probably seeing quite a lot more in the metaverse and on the blockchain side of things. Now, AI has a huge part to play in the metaverse, and we're seeing quite metaversal companies make quite significant investments in these areas as well. So we're seeing a kind of a convergence of these technologies, these platforms, these content happening before our eyes and ears right now. But my sense is that more and more informed choices are being made. I'm not saying that there aren't, there are various acquisitions in the market where you think that the company's bought it in lieu of a strategy. But, if there's going to be a bit of a correction going on and people are going to make a much more thoughtful approaches as well, I hope there's a lot more focus on value rather than PR and headlines.
Yeah, I mean, that's good to hear. That's sort of the sense I've gotten both on the metaverse and blockchain and crypto side, as well as on the AI side, that there's sort of a difference in approach and sort of the madness of the market, I guess. So you've raised the metaverse. So that's an interesting, let's walk down that path. Not only we've talked about sort of changing consumer behavior during the pandemic specifically, I feel like it's also accelerated so the expansion of virtual worlds, sort of exploring gaming universes and exploring sort of this idea of the metaverse or the multiverse or whatever you want to call it. What are specific AI use cases that you've seen that interest you or that you feel are probably going to take on some speed very soon?
Yeah, well, it's always difficult when we talk about the metaverse because it's not one place,
Mm-hmm.
and to a certain extent, it's still theoretical. I think that there are a bunch of metaversal companies out there, but the idea that the metaverse exists today is nothing but an aspiration. Until there's a
Mm-hmm.
fully interoperable world where one can port from place to place and take value with you and transact, etc., etc. But for those of a certain vintage on the call, I think we're kind of at the 1995 of there wasn't an integrated web. There was talk of a World
Mm-hmm.
Wide Web, but you couldn't travel easily, you couldn't transact, you couldn't know where you were, you couldn't be tracked, etc., etc. Now, I think that AI is going to enable the metaverse in order to be able to create these personalized experiences, even at the most basic level of being able to make dynamic renderings around you to your ever moves. If you turn to the left, you want the whole scene to move to the left. Only an artificial technology is going to be able to create that kind of understanding, the ability to be able to capture your image, to capture the areas that you're in. So if it's virtual reality, and particularly where I think the real value of the metaverse is going to be, is some kind of extended reality. Probably the best, reference point for extended reality. It's kind of the Minority Report world, where you walk
Mm-hmm.
around and you can see, information about the weather, to whether shops are going to be sold, or I'm not sure about the future crimes thing, but we'll hold back on that. But in order to be able to understand, translate, and deliver that kind of personalized experience, it's going to have to be some kind of AI based technologies. Now, in that extended reality world, you are going to need everything from massive processing power to actually deep learning understandings in an Internet of Things. And that also needs to be matched with probably one of the other issues that I sort of skipped over earlier in terms of the legal issues and challenges, but needs to be considered, which is privacy. How one reconciles a world where people want to express themselves as a unicorn or with a tail, sometimes even in a virtual world, to be able to then, sort of protect their privacy and not have, sort of giving that up. There are some wonderful AI technologies using on-device AI that can deliver personalized experiences without sharing personal details. That kind of, I call it contextual AI, on-device AI, privacy-first AI, does exist, and I'm working with some really interesting companies in that space. So that's something that I think melds a number of the topics that content owners and context owners are looking at.
Can you share some of those names of the companies, or are those sort of behind closed doors kind of activities that are going on, and things that are being built?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that isn't in stealth is a company called Number Eight. It's the word number eight, somewhat ironically, rather than the
Mm-hmm.
figure eight. They have on-device AI, which sends signals based upon where your phone is, where it is on your person, even which way up it is, what the light around it is, the overall context. And it will say, working from home, out jogging, out shopping. And it uses highly sophisticated on-device AI to be able to take all of the points of input, process it, and send a personalized signal that says what you're doing, but not necessarily saying where you are, or probably what you're going to do next. That's one of the really positive elements of AI. There is the sense that AI, there's a certain form of inevitability that artificial intelligence, be that data processing or the access to every element of what you're thinking and being able to extrapolate that, is an anathema to privacy. Finding ways to be able to combine this in a way that gives people confidence is going to be key to a world of AI. You're aware as well that there are many aspects of being able to use AI technologies for entertainment as well. The ability to be able to create personalized experiences that respect copyright rather than actually trashing all over it is entirely possible. So there are a number of companies out there who are doing that. Really interesting businesses, Rotor, ROTOR, that uses its technologies in order to be able to create personalized experiences in real time for consumers in a way that can mean that they'll get their personalized content whilst always respecting the rights owners.
Yeah, so you mentioned two companies. I think number 8 is based in London, or at least in the UK, and then I think Rotor is based in Dublin, I want to say, or in
That's
Ireland.
right. Belfast.
Yeah,
That's right. Well remembered.
Belfast. Um, are what do you feel like currently is the strongest region? Where are the most exciting companies coming out of, and why is that? Why do you think, like, what kind of stakeholder sort of networking, what kind of community building needs to happen to really facilitate that kind of innovation and to support these kind of business models and ideas?
What I'm really enjoying about AI is it doesn't necessarily seem to be as geographically based. The world of gaming, so you've got what they call the Silicon Fjords, sort of
Hmm.
up the whole Finnish, the ex-Nokians at the likes of Supercell, etc., etc., or in San Francisco for tech businesses. I'm finding really interesting AI businesses pretty much everywhere in a very diffuse way. I think that's only going to increase in a post-pandemic world where location doesn't seem to be quite as important as
Yeah.
context as well. Um, and I am also starting to see some brilliant businesses in Central Europe and on the continent as well. Because actually, I think there'd been a lot of fear about AI technologies, probably more so than had been from our sort of west coast of the US
Mm.
friends. Don't want to generalize crazily. And also with regard to number 8, actually, its founder is Canadian and used to work for BlackBerry and Apple. So it's these companies are extraordinarily diffuse and international right now, and yeah, I'm having a whole bunch of really interesting companies reach out from across the globe. It's a joy to work with them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is location is going to matter less and less, which is a real godsend. I think because it's just going to open up sort of different perspectives and kind of fuse them together in a team and really excel sort of the innovative process. I want to come back a little bit to the privacy issue that you raised. There have been some conversations on obviously ethics connected to AI. That's a big topic that I kind of want to push for sort of towards the end of our conversation. But there have been some discussions about a potential fair trade label, sort of the equivalent for AI in that world. What do you think about that? Sort of a label that says, this company kind of makes sure, this copyright is being respected, other ethical concerns are being taken into account. Is that something you feel could really help this process along?
Yeah, I think that like most things, the real question is are people being informed? And I think probably at the other end of the spectrum, one of the more dangerous uses of information we're seeing right now is deepfakes. So the most common form of cybercrime right now is a cloned version of a voice. It'll be a voice
Hmm.
note or a voicemail, normally from the chief financial officer of the company, saying, Claudia, please send 500,000 euros to Cliff. And you'll just hear this voice, and that has been cloned from a voice. There's
Hmm.
talk today of the major social companies being asked to have a severe crackdown on deepfakes. Deepfakes, I think, have an extraordinary opportunity to be able to manipulate and subvert. Now, we've seen everything from presidential elections or referendums or court cases where they've essentially been somewhat fueled by social interactions. Just imagine if deep fakes of those things had been put out, and if you had rogue presidents or rogue actors or people in court cases pumping out disinformation using AI deepfakes, we need to worry about that. So deepfakes are a very, very important thing to be thinking about. I think we really need to be thinking about privacy. Lots of people are uploading their images right now in order to get beautiful painted versions of them. There's questions as to what's happening to all that data, who's scanning it, how's it being used, how's it being reused. We need to get really hot and thoughtful on that. And then the last issues are, things around things like IP. There's a huge opportunity now to make IP much more resilient, much more valuable, have a lot more long-term value using these extending technologies. But how do you balance that with a way of getting paid? Now, we've seen that in relation to the arrival of the internet, the arrival of mobile, the arrival of socials. That same debate happens with a bit of a time lag, but I think there's a little bit more of an existential threat when it comes to things like privacy and truth and public discourse. So that's probably the top of my worry beads.
And how do you feel about sort of calls for the um, sort of marking pieces of music or other forms of art as connected to AI technology. Is that something you feel would make sense? Like, for instance, that you're on Spotify to mark what kind of composition has been using AI, or where there's a so-called real artist involved?
Yeah, in truth, that's not something that worries me as much. People have been using synthesizers, vocoders, stems, stabs in a way that's super creative. So the idea that there's been an electronic hand on it, you might want to have a sit and have a long conversation with people at Abbey Road about the creation of Sergeant Pepper. So that doesn't as much, but whether or not it's been cloned or whether or not it's been stolen, I think is a separate subject. But if it's been done in a way that's entertaining, and it means you've got the thrill of your favorite artists in the world being able to reimagine them, or to have their works or their images, as it were, or indeed their avatars or their avatars come back to life, these things can be brought to surprise and delight in a really positive way.
Yeah, coming back to sort of another sort of level of ethical concerns, especially connected to music. There's been, obviously a public discourse on how do we train these artificial intelligence, or sort of the machine behind it all. What kind of canon are we using to train them? And there's been sort of some concern that we're basically repeating and perpetuating sort of a mostly white, male Western Europe sort of musical canon to train these AI algorithms. Is that something you feel is sort of justified? And if not, or is this being addressed? Is this really a problem? How can we kind of deal with that as a community?
Yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to things like facial recognition, and it's only been on Western features, or there are certain AI images where my face may not be shown because they can't be my color or my face shape, as it were. That's a real issue. But what I do think we need to do is find models to train better, wider and more diverse voices, more diverse faces, and more diverse content. At the moment, IP is a real issue. So things are having to go old, they're having to go public domain, they're having to go to places where they're not worried about getting sued all the time. So one of the great things is that if we can build models that allow people to train on AI and find some way of paying it back or being able to acknowledge it, I think there could be a really, really helpful future to the content industries. There's always a big worry that digital is going to take a business. There are plenty of examples now that it can be used to extend businesses, provided that you can have a proper licensing model and a proper payment model.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think this takes a whole, almost an army of experts, to really make this space future ready for all of these applications and these opportunities to really be taken to their fullest extent. Is there, I mean, there is a shortage, definitely a shortage of, experts and sort of a new generation of people filling all of these positions that are, opening up in all of these companies. What do you feel is sort of a good way to start if a young person is interested in getting into this field, or someone who's been in the industry and wants to kind of diversify their portfolio or their expertise and kind of get into AI and in that field a little bit more? What would be a good place to start?
Well, platforms like this, conferences like this, are a really, really good place to start. I think the future of AI is only starting to be written, or should I possibly say generated, right now. I think it's a really exciting place to be. And I think that really down to the next generation as well. Be curious, understand the old business models before you disrupt the new ones. That's probably where I would say everyone should start.
A very hopeful message and right on time. Thank you so much, Cliff, for this conversation. I truly value your expertise. Please, continue to be available for these conversations and for the younger sort of minds and innovators, so we can all kind of progress together. So thank you again for your time. Thanks for entertaining AI. And I'm super interested what this platform can do for our community and how to facilitate innovation in the future. So thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of the day.
To you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.